Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Steve Gregorian, President and CEO of the Detroit Economic Club. Welcome to today's meeting. I love the energy, and how about that big Michigan win last night? Woo. All right, 92 years of incredible speakers and networking, and that tradition continues today. I especially want to welcome our DEC members. If you're not a DEC member yet, give me 10 seconds and I'll convince you. Your next job, prospect, client, best friend is right in this room. If you're not a member, we invite you to invest in you. Join today. You can do so at econclub.org. In fact, we'll sweeten the pot. If you do it today on your way out, we'll give you a free event ticket you can use through June. So please do so. All right, as we get started, just please silence your cell phones so we don't disturb the program. And as you know, we've got a tradition of starting with a pledge and a prayer, so please stand and join me as we honor our country with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And kindly remain standing as our invocation today will be delivered by our good friend, Brother Gary Wagner from the Capuchin Soup Kitchen. Brother.
Thank you, Steve. Spartans next year. Let us pray. As once again human beings circled our nearest neighbor, we pray, echoing the great prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, Most High, all-powerful, all-good Lord, all praise is yours, all glory, all honor, and all blessing. To you alone, Most High, do they belong. All praise be yours, my Lord, through all that you have made, for brother sun and sister moon, through sister earth, our mother, who feeds us and produces various fruits with colored flowers and herbs. Now, in this season of Easter, after the passing of Passover, in the springtime of the year, as we mark World Health Day, we pray for good health in body, mind, and spirit. We pray this day for a healthy economy, an economy that benefits all people, especially those who are on the margins or left behind. May the rights of all your people, especially children, to at least adequate health care be a commitment and a goal of business leaders, academics, and policymakers. May those at the top of our society never be blind to the lives of those below. God of the nations, may the health of the world, the health of the nation, the health of our city and our communities be promoted and protected so that there be war no more and peace may reign. God of all that is good, while an apple a day may not keep the doctor away, may we be most grateful for what really matters. For as the late great Ethel Merman sang, we got the sun in the morning and the moon at night. Loving God, despite all the troubles in our world, may the wisdom of St. Augustine guide us. Take care of your body as if you were going to live forever, and take care of your soul as if you were going to die tomorrow. We pray in the name by which each of us calls upon God. Amen. You're welcome.
Thank you, brother. Let the record reflect, I look at him as a man of peace, but he was up here trying to start a brawl with the Michigan State stuff. So. All right, a couple of thank yous. I want to say thank you to WJR, who's doing their focus show live right outside the room. Thanks to WDIV and Detroit PBS for live streaming today's meeting. Students are here today and always, courtesy of our generous corporate sponsors. Their morning already began with a great session with Austan Goolsbee. Please hold your applause while I tell you who's with us. We've got the Dragons from Lake Orion High School, thanks to Tina and Corwell Health. Northville High School, thanks to Fifth Third Bank. Hazel Park High School, thanks to Jason. I saw you, Jason, earlier. Love the school spirit. Good job. Jason, thank you, JP Morgan Chase. Rochester Adams High School, thanks to Ambassador Ghaffari and Ghaffari Associates. And we've got students from Eastern Michigan University, thanks to Jim Nicholson and PBS Chemicals. Give the students a welcoming round of applause and thank our sponsors. Quickly, a couple things on your tables. I always want to recognize our corporate sponsors and partners. Make no mistake, we would not be here if it wasn't for their generosity. So if you're inclined to inquire about that, I'd love to talk to you about some great benefits of being a sponsor. Also, on your table is our season lineup, and man, it is on fire. Next up, we've got a popular one for any Detroit Lions fans. April 16th, we'll host our annual NFL draft event. We'll hear from President Rod Wood and some Lions beat writers. That's always a fun event. April 30th, we'll be right back here on this stage with the conversation on the economy and the auto industry. And this time it'll be with Gus Faucher, Chief Economist from PNC Bank, along with Mike Bickers from PNC Bank and Mike Wall from S&P Global Mobility. This spring is red hot at the DEC, and there's much more to come. Please check out your schedule, and we look forward to having you with us. All right, 92 years of speakers, and those speakers tell the history of our country. April 7th was a popular date in the DEC's history. Austin, you now join a list of 12 others who graced our stage on this day. Here's a couple of highlights. It was a popular day for cabinet secretaries. One Commerce Secretary in 1952, and in 1980, a name you might recognize, Commerce Secretary J. Van Andel, especially if you're from the West Side. 1986, Health Secretary Joseph Califano was with the DEC. Listen to this one. 1947, a gentleman named Bedell Monroe was CEO of Pennsylvania Central Airlines, and he visited the DEC to propose floating ocean airports. Not sure that was going to work out, but good for him. 1969, Time Magazine special correspondent John Scott gave a Vietnam War update. And Austin, this is your second visit to the DEC. We're pleased to add you as our 13th speaker on this day in DEC history. Congratulations. Thanks for being with us. I also want to take a quick moment to thank our moderator in advance. He's going to be on stage in a minute. Sandy Barua is a former Fed board member, and he and his team at the Detroit Regional Chamber are doing some really heavy lifting for our city and state. So thank you, Sandy, to you and your team, and for your important work. Appreciate it. Finally, use your smartphone. We want you to be involved in today's program. We want you to take lots of pictures, share with your social media, and you can also use your phone and submit a question with the QR code on your table. Those questions will then make their work to our presiding officer, who I'm about to put to work. Tina Fries-Decker is the president and CEO of Corewell Health. She's a DEC board member, an amazing supporter of the DEC, and to so many good things here in our city, region, and state. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tina Fries-Decker.
So after yesterday's win, my daughter made a decision about where to go to college. Michigan. I don't know what would have happened if UConn won. So thank you so much, Steve, and good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be here. I have the great honor of introducing our speaker today. Austan Goolsbee is the 10th president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Dr. Goolsbee previously served as the Robert P. Gwynn Professor of Economics at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Prior to that, he served as chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, where he was a member of President Obama's cabinet. And he also won a contest to be the funniest celebrity in Washington in 2009. So hopefully he can rival that today. He has a PhD in economics from MIT and a BA and MA in economics from Yale University. He's a Fulbright Scholar and an Alfred P. Sloan Fellow. He was named one of the 6 gurus of the future by Financial Times. And so we're so glad that he's here today. Moderating today is a familiar face to all of us. Sandy Barua is the president and CEO of the Detroit Regional Chamber, the 3rd largest chamber of commerce in the nation, and also a board member of the DEC. Sandy joined the chamber in 2010 after a distinguished career in Washington, D.C., where he served in President George W. Bush's administration. I think he was really close to that funniest celebrity, so maybe we'll see some of that today. I know that we are in for such a fantastic conversation today, especially since Austan's LinkedIn post says, what Disneyland was to his kids at age 10, that's what economics is to him. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Please give a warm Detroit Economic Club welcome to Austan Goolsbee and Sandy Barua.
No pressure, right?
Yeah, seriously.
So, all right. Before we get started here, let's set the tone here.
Oh, Wolverine football. This is, the thing is, I was talking to my people and I said, you know, how do you think the reception will be? And they said, no, it's going to be, as long as Michigan wins, this is going to be like a breakfast meeting. Like they'll have been out all night.
Yeah,
nobody's going to have a word. Yeah. Then meanwhile, I meet with the high school and college students before we came in here. Can I tell you, they literally had notebooks of research. They were like, you said on January 5th, you know, the following. That hasn't been proven wrong. I was like, whoa, wait. I told them the quality of your questions far exceeds the entire Fed press corps. Like, turn on the Jay Powell's press conference. They're not asking as sophisticated questions as what the students did. It was really impressive.
And the students are asking much smarter questions than I have prepared.
Yeah, they were. I was like, wow, I am not worthy of this crowd.
Some of the kids are ready to replace me at any moment.
That's right.
It's going to be a mid-game swap.
That's right.
So, Austan, you know, it's a difficult time in the world and in the national economy. You know, our nation's at war. We have very uneven economic forecasts and outcomes. The American consumer is at its lowest point, according to the University of Michigan Consumer Index. So let's talk sports. Congratulations to the University of Chicago Maroons, who made it to the Elite Eight for the first time ever. And Chicago teams are doing much better than the last time you and I sat down together.
That's true. That's true. We had the White Sox set the record for the worst team in the history of baseball. And the Bears are coming back. With the Chicago Fed District is 90% of Illinois, Michigan, Indiana, Wisconsin, Iowa. So it's kind of heart of the Midwest. We did pretty good in March Madness. That district had 8 of the last 16, had 4 of the Elite 8, had 2 of the Final 4, and the national champion. And our Detroit and Chicago are joined at the hip. There's one branch for the Chicago Fed. It's in Detroit, as you probably know, and we have many of our Detroit branch board here, and Sandy was our chair. We have billions of dollars of cash in there in the vaults, and we have bomb dogs that sniff to make sure the armored cars, you know, are not coming to get us. And our bomb dogs moonlight as the dogs at the Lions game. So whenever the Lions do well, we kind of feel like we're, there was even a segment on the local Fox affiliate that we pitched as the hardest working dogs in Detroit. You know, all week long they're sniffing out the armored carriers, and then they go out to the Lions game. They don't even get a weekend off. So.
Well, and neither do you. You do not get a weekend off either. And just quickly before I forget, let's not forget to congratulate a great season by the MSU men's team and the Michigan women's team, Elite Eight there as well too. So we have so much to be proud of. Congratulations to both MSU fans and Michigan fans, and of
look
course
at
the Maroons.
Look at him, the diplomat. Ever the diplomat.
Oh, we've only started, Austan. All right. Austan, this is obviously not our first rodeo. You and I have known each other for a long time. We're friends. I always want to start out with a Fed 101, just to
Okay.
make sure everyone understands. So, first of all, the Federal Reserve Bank is not a federal agency, right?
Of Chicago, yes, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. And the Federal Reserve Bank is set up and was set up to be independent from both the judicial branch, the executive branch and the legislative branch of the United States.
Basically, yes. It's a bit of a weird setup. The FOMC table, where they decide on the interest rates every 6 weeks, there's 19 policymakers sitting around the table. 7 of them are political appointees. They're governors in Washington. Jay Powell is the chair. And then there are 12 Reserve Banks presidents also sitting around the table. Those are not government agencies. They're not-for-profits. They have their own boards of directors. They designed this system in a weird, kludgy way. The Speaker of the House was Champ Clark, was from Missouri, and the head of the banking committee in the Senate was also from Missouri. So 2 of the 12 banks are in Missouri. But that said, there was a stroke of genius in setting up the Fed the way they did, which is you get independent views from around the country. It's not just controlled by Washington, D.C., or Washington, D.C. plus the banks on Wall Street. And in 1913, when they created the Fed, people were very nervous about that, and they remain very nervous about that today. So we take every one of the reserve banks takes that independence quite seriously, and every one of the 19 people sitting around the table takes the job extremely seriously. You're out of the elections business, you're out of the partisan business. The law, the Federal Reserve Act law, says we are to think of 2 things and 2 things only when setting monetary policy: stabilize prices, maximize employment. We call that the dual mandate, and that's kind of all you need to know of Fed 101. Everybody who comes there, they have different worldviews, but they're thinking about the economy when they're making that decision.
And the other industrialized nations, almost without exception, have set up their central banks in a very similar way, right? That they are essentially independent.
Yes,
Not
on that part. So we are special in this regional aspect, and I think it's important. It's similar to how Europe is set up, but they aren't regions. They're different countries. But every economist, I was a research economist 30 years at the University of Chicago before I came to the Fed, close to unanimous among economists that it's extremely important that your central bank not be subject to interference from the sitting government. Because it could be theory, but mostly it's based on just look around the world in countries and at times when the central bank is not independent. You know what happens. The administration presses, cut the rates. If inflation comes roaring back, that'll be the next person's problem. And so there must be some function of the central bank that is able to maintain independence and base the decisions on what the actual economic conditions are.
Now, President Trump, known for his subtleness and quietness, has been pressuring Chair Powell to do what he can to lower interest rates. But it's not unusual for a president to try to jawbone the Federal Reserve Bank. So what you're experiencing now is maybe different in tone, but not unusual. Is that a way to look at it?
Maybe. As I say, my observation of the people sitting around the table is there are a lot of opinions expressed in public by a lot of people about what should happen. And I'm not allowed to speak. The rules say I'm only allowed to speak for myself. I'm not allowed to speak for the Fed or for anybody else. I will say for me, I try to pay attention to what the critiques are and figure out what the arguments and do I think they're right or not right. But there's nothing in the Federal Reserve Act that says make sure the stock market is happy. And there's nothing in the Federal Reserve Act that says make sure the president is happy or anybody else. It's all about stabilize the prices and maximize employment. So there's nothing wrong with the president or anyone else expressing an opinion or expressing an argument. If they're actively talking about taking away the independence of the FOMC, however, now that's a really bad idea. That is a recipe to have inflation come roaring back. And I would just ask anybody who thinks that we should have a system like that, just go look at countries that have had it. What happens?
Yeah, when you have political control over that, the inflation.
Yeah, look, you know exactly what's going to happen, and people don't like it. I mean, we just spent several painful years trying to get inflation down, and people do not like inflation. So just be careful.
Right. And it's a trade-off between inflation and interest rates. I mean, I've been in so many meetings with you over the years, especially when you were bumping up interest rates to combat inflation, and you'd sit in especially community meetings, but even some business level meetings saying, we need lower interest rates, we know lower interest rates, but say, do you understand the impact on inflation?
Yeah, look, it can be a trade-off. Or sometimes it's going great and it doesn't have to be a trade-off, okay? So you got, in a normal business cycle, let's call it, as you go into recession, employment goes down and inflation goes down at the same time. So the Fed says, okay, let's cut the rates and try to bump them, but heat it back up. Or if the economy starts overheating, employment is high, but inflation is also high, so you try to slow it down. The hardest moments for any central bank are when you get things going, both sides going wrong at the same time. A stagflationary shock. We've faced a little bit of that. We tend to think of high oil prices. Oil prices rising do that. Industry, the auto companies, the farmers, they're like, whoa, wait a minute, our costs are rising, we're gonna have to reduce employment. At the same time, prices are going up, and now we're in a very uncomfortable, almost not even a trade-off. You're just in a very uncomfortable situation, and there's not an obvious cookbook of should we heat or should we, heat things up or cool things down. It's not obvious which way to do it.
So let's stay on this. The national economic picture. So let's put you in the FOMC meeting as opposed to your job in Chicago, 7th District. What are you and your colleagues at the Chicago Fed and your other Fed president peers, what do you all see when you look at the national economy?
Well, look, he's trying to get me in trouble. I can't say what they say. I can only say what I say. What I see is some weakness. We came through 2023 with inflation raging. That's when I came into the Fed. So I tend to mark everything to pre and post January 9th, 2023, because that's when I showed up. Inflation's way above the target. We have a 2% inflation target. We're way, way above that target. And unemployment is extraordinarily low by historic terms. So it was kind of obvious in an environment like that, we need to raise the rates. And we need to raise the rates a lot because we've got to slow down inflation and we've got a very large cushion. The job market is as hot as it's ever been. Inflation comes down a fair amount, almost as much as it's ever come down in a single year in 2023, without a recession. And that's virtually unparalleled. The only times previously that inflation has come down that much have been accompanied by either the Paul Volcker era or other times, very severe contractions of the economy are how they got inflation to go down. Then we come to the nearer pair. So inflation falling, unemployment drifting upward, but still objectively pretty low. Then we start to lose the margin of error and it gets a little tighter. As the tariffs begin, that's the first of a stagflationary direction shocks to hit the economy. The hope was that tariffs would just be a one-time thing and that whatever inflation was coming from tariffs, it would go away. It would be transitory.
But that, you were never going to use that word again.
That the inflation would be transitory. My concern at this immediate time is that we've got to get our heads around an oil shock, which is going to drive up prices in a stagflationary way, potentially, before the other one has gone away. So the prices spiked from tariffs, and they were supposed to go away, and this is now hitting before that went away, and that's eerily reminiscent of that period where the COVID supply shock damage happened, driving up inflation. And then the war breaks out in Ukraine before that's fixed itself, and it's another supply shock on top of it. So how persistent this is going to be, I think, is going to have a major impact on how you view the economy. I think the job market is basically stable, but not great. Unusual in that there's very low hiring, which feels like a recession, but there's very low layoffs, which normally is the opposite of a recession. So it's strange for those both to be happening at the same time. I think it's from uncertainty. I think that's what happens when businesses are uncertain and they say, we're just going to sit on our hands until we figure out, is this going to be a temporary shock? Since the 70s, if you're old enough, you might remember the awful economic outcome from high oil prices in the 70s. We've gotten less oil using as an economy since then, and we've become a much bigger energy producer since then. So if this sustains, there is likely to be at least some part of the economy that's rebounding and producing energy. But summary, I'm cautious / nervous about it in the moment.
So some of our big bank presidents, Jamie Dimon and Brian Moynihan of JP Morgan Chase and B of A respectively, have both issued statements of one form or another just this week about their outlook. B of A is saying we're going to be at 4% inflation at some point this year. Jamie Dimon's letter to shareholders was, let's say, a less than flattering outlook to the economy. These are obviously smart people in a related business to yours. How do you absorb input like that?
Look, as I say, if there are critiques of the Fed or there are analyses of how the economy is doing from smart people, I try to go figure out where their head is. It pains me, and I made a face when you said 4% inflation. Yikes. If we've been above the 2% target for 5 years consecutively now, and we were making progress. We were way high. Oh, I'll do it backwards for you. We were making progress. Then we kind of stalled out, and now it's been inching itself up the other way. So we got down almost to 2%. Now it's been 3%, and if we're headed to 4%, that's not a stable. The longer you go and the higher you are above the 2% target, the more it just gets ingrained into cost plus contracts where people come down and they say, well, if inflation is going to be 5%, I need a wage increase of 6%. And then the business says, if we got to pay wages increases of 6%, we got to raise prices 7%. And that's a very uncomfortable situation for the central bank or for anyone. So I hope that they're not describing that. yet I still can't get past, it doesn't look like a regular recession. They're not describing a regular recession.
And that's not the words that they used.
Yeah, that's not, and so we're all still just trying to make up, trying to figure out what is the appropriate action. And it's why the ChatGPT is not going to replace the FOMC anytime soon. It's rooted in, the LLMs are rooted in the past, and there is a fundamental way in which what we're seeing now is extremely unusual, is almost unprecedented. And so the lessons of the past, they're at best cousins. They're definitely not identical twins, and they're probably not even siblings.
So you mentioned AI. AI is on everybody's mind, must be on your mind. What is your take on how AI might impact our labor market and then the economy as a whole?
There's a future impact and there's a right now impact. Let me just state, in the right now impact, I am a skeptic that almost anything that we've seen in the job market or in the economy is due to AI, because the adoption simply has not been great
Even
enough.
the kind of growing crisis with recent college graduates, I mean, that unemployment rate is now almost 11%.
Not quite, but the hiring rate is extremely low. And anytime the hiring rate is low, the most impacted group is going to be new graduates, because they're disproportionately trying to get hired. So there's a lot of pain in that environment. And any of us who are parents of teenage and college age kids know the stress associated with that. I still think that other than very directed sectors, like within parts of the tech sector, I think the overall hiring rate for young people being low cannot be explained by AI. It's just the adoption of AI has not been big enough to explain what's been happening. I think those are deeper factors. As we look out over a longer run, I would say economists and the technologists themselves almost always end up on crossways on what will be the historic impact of new technologies. Back in like 2017 or 2018, there was a now famous in this world meeting on the economics of artificial intelligence that took place at the University of Toronto. And they brought in a group of extremely high-powered economists and a bunch of the leading technology people. And as I characterized it was a fascinating conference, but the entire thing was technology person gives a paper that says, the robots are gonna be so amazing, they're gonna be better than humans at every single thing, and nobody's gonna have a job. And then an economist will give a paper and say, every other time in the last 1,000 years that this thing replaced them, that opened up new types of business and it made us richer. And so it's going to be fine. And then the technology person would say, no, you don't understand how amazing this is going to be. It's going to wipe out everything. And then they say, no, you don't understand. It's going to grow. I'm still more in that economist camp, that if you look at the big general purpose technologies, as we call them, telephones, computers, the internet, electricity, there is disruption. I'm not saying there's not disruption, but over even the medium term, not just the long run, they generate far more jobs than they destroy, and they facilitate incomes going up. So I think that is how it is going to play out. But it doesn't make it any less. It doesn't make it any less disruptive if it happens really quickly, that people got to retool and figure out what they're doing.
So my investment in floaty chair futures is not a good idea? Is that what you're telling me?
How buoyant are you? You know?
Less so every day. All right, we're coming down to the end of my time with you. Let's turn regionally. Region 7, specifically the state of Michigan and the auto industry. Tariffs have cost the global automotive industry $50 billion. I'm sorry, $35 billion. The reversal in EV policy / fortunes has cost the industry the $50 billion. What do you see when you look out Region 7 in the state of Michigan in particular, because you and I have talked about Michigan quite a bit?
When they on Liberation Day, when we got the announcement about tariffs, as you know, there was a hair on fire aspect to the whole 7th district, and especially to Michigan, because if you looked at tariff exposure of the 7 most exposed states, 4 of the 7 are in the 7th district, even a higher percentage than the March Madness bracket. And Michigan was number 1. Michigan's the number 1 most exposed to tariff.
That's not. We don't want to be number 1 there.
You don't want to be number 1 on that one. Now, from Liberation Day, we backed it down. USMCA compliant stuff got exempted. Many of the manufacturers said, we can live with this. If this is a one-time, if this is one and done, it'll be okay. We were waiting for that to fade out. And now we add the oil shock. Now, hopefully that will prove temporary as well. But one of the leading auto executives that we talked to, and the Chicago Fed, we do a lot of talking to people, both on our board, high-powered folks, as well as people throughout the district. And the words the auto executive used were telling. They said, the thing about just-in-time manufacturing, which is what we have now, is that at any given moment, almost every component part supply is not sitting in a warehouse somewhere, it's on a truck being sent. So if the price of gas is going to go up, if it's in Chicago, $5.20 a gallon. If we're going to have $5.20 a gallon gas, that's going to affect the supply chain. We're going to be back into a world with disruptions and costs rising. So I'd say there's heightened anxiety about this cost aspect, and is inflation coming back? And our poor friends in the agriculture business, they're getting stuck in I would say both ways, but now it's 3-dimensional, all the ways they're getting stuck. The weather hasn't been cooperating that great. The cost of all the inputs is way up, and a lot of it is based on petroleum. The sales prices of what they're getting for the crops is down, or at least flat. And the retaliation has closed off some of the markets. So there are definitely challenges. That said, the economy continues to grow, and can I tell you, the most important thing, the driver of growth for the last 3 years in the U.S. economy has not been data centers. For all the talk of that, it's been the U.S. consumer chugging along every 6 months. In their consumer sentiment measures, they say, it stinks, it's the worst, I hate it. And yet they continue spending, and their incomes have maintained. So as long as that remains true, I'm still basically optimistic that the boom can continue. Yeah.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. I've only got 2 minutes left with you. Let's talk about the K-shaped economy. So you mentioned the consumers,
yeah,
right? But it is true, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Economist, that it is the wealthier people, earning at about $150 or more a year that are driving the economy, and those who are making less than that are really being dragged down.
I would split it a different way. I only did the idea I mostly agree with, but there's one subtlety. The higher you go, the better they've been doing. But if you say, on the economy as a whole, is it all being driven by the top 1% or the top 5%? Absolutely not. The fact that overall consumer spending grew the second half of last year about 3% at an annual rate, which is quite strong. It's virtually impossible to have an economy-wide consumer spending growth of that without it being broad-based. Okay, something like 75% of the spending done in the United States is done by the bottom 90%. The top 10% don't account for enough of the spending for it to be that. So whatever aspect, and the New York Fed puts out statistics on spending by income groups, and they have it divided in thirds. And it's true the top third grew more than the bottom third, but only by like 1 percentage point over the last couple of years. So I think is it a lowercase k? Maybe it's a lowercase k economy. For the most part, the main trunk of the economy is affecting everybody's rise and fall together.
All right, so we're going to transition our program here, and I'm going to bring up Tina Fries-Decker in just a minute, but I have a very quick pop quiz for everyone. Which one of the following is untrue about our friend Austan Goolsbee? Number 1, he's been on The Daily Show. Number 2, he's been on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me on NPR. Or number 3, he hosted a television show on the History Channel. Which one is untrue? Yeah, trick question, they're all true. All right, Tina Fries-Decker.
Thank you so much. So you asked really fantastic questions. There's a couple more that have come through that we wanted to get your thoughts on. First one is, what about the U.S. economy is keeping you up at night? And what about it lets you sleep?
I always say that the job of the Fed is kind of like the night's watch. We're not supposed to sleep at night, okay? Everything keeps us up at night. There shouldn't be anything that goes wrong that we haven't at least thought through what it is. That said, the possibility of stagflation, outbreak coming from high oil prices before the tariff inflation went away, leading to the main engine of growth, the U.S. consumer, just giving up and saying, we don't have confidence, we're going to start hoarding our money, and sending us into a stagflationary recession. That'd be the worst outcome.
What helps you sleep?
What helps me sleep? Besides, look, a lot of the briefings material, you know, if they could turn that into an audio book, I'd be set for life. But it's just the opposite side of the same thing that makes me nervous. The strongest thing we have going for us is that the U.S. consumer has had solid incomes. The unemployment rate is 4.3%, which is historically pretty strong. There's commitments to entrepreneurship and new ideas, and we've had a blessing of stronger than trend productivity growth in this country in the last 2.5 years. All of those are fabulous. And if we get more of that, we will all sleep better.
Thank you. Are you concerned about the current level of national debt? And if not, why do you believe it is manageable?
Look, I am concerned about the trend. When you're at the Fed, you're in the monetary policy business. You're out of the fiscal policy business. So I don't weigh in anymore about what should the tax rates be, or what should the spending, or should they sign deals, shut down the government, et cetera. I always say our motto at Chicago Fed, like good Midwesterners, is that there is no bad weather, there is only bad clothing, and you give us the conditions, and we figure out what jacket, and we proceed. The debt in this country is a condition that we have to adjust to. Now, the law, I told you, the law says anything that affects prices or employment, the law requires us to think about it. So if you think that an unsustainable fiscal trajectory is inflationary over the long run, will affect what the tax rates will be, what the growth rate will be, all of which I do, and I have many public statements before I was ever at the Fed. If you think that, then it will come back and affect the Fed, but I'm not really at liberty anymore to weigh in on what the politics. I think the problem of debt and deficits is not that it will lead to an immediate fiscal crisis. It's that you have to pay back the money. And so if you just ask kids born today or the high schoolers who ask the questions, what is the lifetime tax rate that they're going to have to pay over their whole life? It's a lot higher than somebody was born in 1951. And I find that weird. You know, if you think about it, is that what you want? Do you want that kids and grandkids would have to pay a lot more so that we can do what we do today? But that's where we are.
So you read a lot of books in terms of the data that you have that may or may not put you to sleep. You talk to a lot of people. Give us the advice on what you look for, what's helpful for you to know as you're making decisions or getting to your conclusions.
When I got to the Fed, people who want high interest rates, they call hawks. And people who want low interest rates, they call doves. So I got there, and immediately the press started saying, are you a hawk or a dove? And my thing was like, I don't aspire to be a bird of any kind. I only ever wanted to be one of the data dogs. And the first rule of the data dogs is there's a time for walking and a time for sniffing, and you need to know the difference. And the second rule is sniff everything that hits the floor to see if it's food. And that's the approach that I take to the statistics. You'll never hear me say, if you ask, well, what do you not look at? There's nothing. I will look at every piece of data and anecdote that you will give me. That said, it's gotten harder to know exactly what to look at. There was a time when the monthly payroll job growth number was by far the best indicator of where you are in the business cycle and the job market. Well, now that's become much more complicated because the crackdown on immigration, there have been changes in labor force participation and retirement decisions. So now it's best to look at a whole bunch of things. So on the job market side, I look at the hiring rate, the vacancy rate, the layoff rate, the unemployment rate to supplement those things. And I try to take as much private sector information as possible because since COVID, there've been a huge expansion of these private measures of how the economy's doing.
Thanks. So one more question that we have from the audience. If you could go back, what would you say to the workers about what you have been thinking?
Of what? Wait, what would I say to the workers about what I have been thinking?
What you were thinking previously. Anything that you would...
Like before I got to the Fed, you mean?
Yeah.
I guess when I first came into the Fed, I went and looked up the polling, and big majorities of the country say in polling that they're familiar with the Federal Reserve, but they don't know what it does. And even bigger majorities say whatever it is that the Federal Reserve is doing, they're doing a bad job at it. And so one thing I would do is I would explain what the Fed does. And especially like the Chicago Fed, yes, we go every 6 weeks to vote on monetary policy. But it's mostly, there's 1,700 people work there, and we run the payment system of the of much of the payment system plumbing of the United States. Over $5 trillion a day of wire transfers and ACH direct deposit. All of that is going over to Fed wires. All the cash in America is printed by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, but is distributed through the feds. Detroit, Chicago, we have billions of dollars of cash in there. And we have supervisors of banks. We are a bank to your bank, most likely. And we supervise them. And we have community development. And so when we go to these meetings of the FOMC, what I'm thinking is a collection of what the research department has told me and what I've heard from all of you and what I've heard from people in the 7th District about how things are going. And everybody takes the job really seriously. They've come from different partisan backgrounds. They've come from different employment backgrounds, and there's some economists and some business people and some variety of backgrounds and worldviews, but we're not the bad guys. We're the guardians of the galaxy, and that's kind of what I've been thinking.
So I know there are a few Guardians of the Galaxy in the audience. Let's give them a round of applause for all that they're doing. So it's time for our lightning round. So a couple questions just for you. Only a few seconds to answer the question.
Okay.
I know this will be hard for you.
I can do this. Yeah.
Okay. So what profession, other than your current one, would you like to try?
Ooh, I always said that if I couldn't be an economist, I would love to do voiceovers of auto commercials. And I was wondering, remember the guy Tavis Smiley? Tavis Smiley has a radio show. And I was on the radio show, and I said that. And he was like, we have all of these auto sponsors of our show. Do it. Give your pitch. And I did a thing, and he said, that was terrible. He's like, stick to your day job. Yeah.
Well, there probably is somebody here in this room that can help you with that.
Yeah, exactly.
What was the last book that you read?
The last book that I read, I said that whole thing about birds, and now it's going to seem like I'm lying to you, but I'm not. Is a book called What Is It Like to Be a Bird? And it's actually fascinating. And it's a guy with all of these intricate drawings, and it goes through like 50 different birds and what their senses are and how they perceive the world. It was actually quite fascinating.
That's fantastic.
That's the only bird book I've ever read, but it just happens to be the last one.
You can trade places with someone for one day. Who would you trade places with?
Ooh. Would I have their skill set? That seems important. I might trade places with somebody from the team last night. I mean, that would be pretty exciting.
Be cool. Good. Thank you. So the last question is, what advice would you give your 25-year-old self?
My 25-year-old self? Mm-hmm. Take things more seriously. No, my 25-year-old self. That was what I graduated from graduate school, and I started at the University of Chicago as assistant professor when I was 25. And I was approximately the same age as the students. And in my first course, it wasn't literally the first class, but in my first course that I was teaching, I was partway through, and there was a guy in the class, Larry Guo was his name. And he said, he raised his hand and he said, Professor, I feel that I could explain better what you're saying than you can. Would you mind if I did that? And I was like, okay. And this was back when there wasn't, he had a pointer, there were no power. So he comes up, he kind of takes the pointer from me, he just kicks me to the side, and Larry was an engineer, okay? And so the root of the thing is I was trying to do something that was calculus without using calculus. And Larry got up and was like, this is simple, this is just, we're taking a second derivative, and he starts going through. So I've completely lost control of the room. Half the class is like, why did you let this guy take over the class? So when it finishes, I'm like, oh man, this is bad. And I go to the faculty lounge to eat lunch. And there was a famous older professor, Mert Miller. He won the Nobel Prize. And I described the thing to Mert. I'm like, Mert, this is my first class. I don't know what I'm doing. You know, this guy took it over. And he says, young man, I'm going to give you the advice Milton Friedman gave me when I got to the university in 1961. When you set foot on the campus of the University of Chicago, never give up the chalk. That was his thing. That would be my advice to my 25-year-old self. Never give up the chalk. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So thank you so much for all the work you've done, for your expertise in what you're doing with the Federal Reserve, and also for your humor and lightness in bringing it today. Now I'll turn it over to Steve.
Austan, you are welcome back here anytime. Thanks for being with us. Tina, thanks for your important role, and I'm really glad you did not ask Sandy what helps him get to sleep. It might involve the liquid that he swirls every night. So thank you, Sandy, for playing your important role. Ladies and gentlemen.
This is a bold move. They got a mutually assured destruction thing going. So if you're giving dirt on him, you just give him a
lots of love to
Sandy.
Yes, lots of love. So tell your friends and colleagues to join the DEC on time